What's a treat for you? I know a lot of you people just had your hearts sink to the bottom of your stomachs in seeing me solo in frame, but we got a special treat for you here on this special Wednesday. Pete and D Money, hop in right now. D Money luxuriating at an undisclosed location. We appreciate you chiming in here, D Money. We're gonna go kind of like staccato a little bit. We're not exactly gonna be playing jazz today because I got a funky return situation here. But yesterday was media day, and we actually finally have stuff to react to. I'll lean on Pete first. You and I were dialed in. Now, Pete, you've been known to be a skeptic of some of these quarterbacks we've brought in the past. You like to read the tea leaves. You like to vibe check. You like to see the surrounding team around the quarterback, not the personnel on the field, but the people that the quarterback off the field surrounds himself with. We'll be truthful to the audience. You had your concerns about Cam Ward and his reputation. He obviously erased all of those with his play and his approach to the game. Carson Beck comes in. A lot of people have made up their mind about his character. I think Carson Beck yesterday, immediate day, was a real bright spot for the University of Miami. And I think if you had certain concerns and if you had formulated an opinion on the young man, maybe he swayed some people. Pete, your takeaway from Carson Beck and his very impressive media day.
Yeah, Mike, I thought it was a good outing for him. It was really his first, obviously, opportunity to not only talk to Miami media, but any media in general since he had been at Miami. I think there were some people kind of questioning whether or not they'd actually send him out there. But to me, it was a no-brainer. And I thought he handled himself very, very well. I thought the answers that he gave, especially to a lot of the different questions, spun the different ways that they were about following up Cam Ward. That to me was like the question he was getting, time and time again. And I think he answered it well about every time that he was asked that question. And now it just becomes seeing him out there on the field. I gotta say, man, we've had a lot of people in our inner circles, Chance Mack, starting conspiracy theories about his status and stuff like that. And I think that everyone needs to calm down. And yes, Mario and the way he operates is he doesn't really give you much in terms of the player's health. He's not going to give you the full story, let's say. And I don't think that coaches across the country really ever give the full story. I don't think this is a Mario only thing, but you've put a lot of eggs into this basket of Carson Beck. I'm not even talking money-wise. I'm talking about how you've built out this roster quarterback-wise. So I just don't think they would have done that if they didn't feel that. And this isn't a feelings thing. This is from what they've seen also. I don't think they would have operated the way they would have if they didn't have concrete or feel like they had concrete evidence that this could work.
D Money, we'll kick it over to you. One of the things that I was really interested in hearing is Carson Beck expound on his relationship with that locker room. This is a guy that came over from Georgia, and the reputation was as soon as he went out with injury, the quarterback that's replacing him in Gunner, that's the guy that the team is going to rally around. And we got conflicting reports on how Carson was viewed inside of that Georgia locker room. I think a lot of what I was concerned about got put to rest pretty easily by what Carson said. What was your takeaway from his really impressive appearance at ACC Media Day, D Money?
First of all, good to see you guys. Yeah, I'm not in an undisclosed location. I'm in Denver, Colorado, right? So we were headed to Rocky Mountain National Park. So before that, my son wanted to go to a Rockies game. So we're in Denver. Downtown Denver, not great. I mean, Miami downtown's not the best. So not every city's downtown is their jewel. Downtown Denver, got some work to do, but excited to get out to the mountains, to God's country. Heard the wildlife is outstanding. We'll catch some trout, ride some horses. So it'll be a good time. We'll still be doing the show pretty much every single day with the position breakdowns. But as far as Beck, he's old, right? So I think we got to remember this guy is 24 years old. So he's just a lot older than a lot of these people. I mean, think of yourself at 23, 24 versus 18, 19. So I just think his age is a factor when you look at it and how he carries himself in some of these situations in terms of bonding with the team. I don't think he's going to be best friends with everybody just because there's not that many people his age. Like, CJ Daniels and him, you saw them going to basketball games and stuff. CJ Daniels is old. But when you talk about, Toney, Trader, these guys are like 19 years old, right? So they're just different ages. And I think that's something you saw in Georgia, where the people were his age, were in the pros already. So like Gunnar Stockton was closer to the age of his teammates. So of course he was living with his team, with his teammates and all that kind of stuff. And Beck is off campus because his boys are already gone, right? So I think you see the age shining through and how he carries himself, how he answers questions. One repeated thing you heard about Beck from other people were the intelligence of Beck on the field. I think that's something that you hear a lot about. Just this guy's he works on it. He's natural in terms of seeing things, and he also prepares. So that was something that I heard all offseason. You see it on tape when you see how he just kind of operates, and then reinforced really by every single player that I interviewed. Before I kick it back over, one question from Trainer that I want to answer. Did Ruben Bain decide not to go to media day? I thought I heard that. No, like there was no controversy or anything here. He had a prearranged situation, like good situation, like nothing bad, already for this week. This is like an off week for the players. So media is kind of right in the middle of the off week. So in Ruben Bain's case, he had plans all ahead of time, all cleared, zero non-issue. I'm only bringing it up just because I want to make sure there's no concern or people reading into things. This was totally known ahead of time that Ruben Bain was not going to be going to media day, and has zero to do with him answering questions, dealing with the media. It's just he had a prior commitment during that time period.
Mike, I'll tee this one up for you. But outside of just the on-camera interviews stuff with Carson Beck, I think we've both heard really good things from behind the scenes and how he's dealt with the media likes out there and just carrying himself in the atmosphere where, quite frankly, he's to me the biggest name that's out there this week, just in terms of
Bill Belichick's out there, and we're going to get that fireworks display on Thursday.
I think in terms of players, like the spotlight is definitely on him.
Yeah, Klubnik. I mean, we've discussed his it factor, right? And this is actually the jump off point. And thank you for the vine, Pete. Is a lot of people made their mind up about Carson Beck because they know him as the boyfriend in the TikTok videos, and they may not think that he's all about ball there. He is approaching this like a mature dude entering his mid-20s. He's approaching this as if he's getting paid a nice salary for professional work. His approach was super professional. I spoke to several people out at ACC Media Day, and Carson Beck really stuck out in terms of his preparation for ACC Media Day, his professional approach to it. Everyone came away very impressive. This is a guy that is going to be a leader in a different way. Look, I'm not going to say that how someone approaches media day is how you judge them on the balance of the season. Obviously, their play will do that. I know that Cam Ward had a shocking level of confidence about him at ACC Media Day that if you were in on Cam, you would have taken that as proof positive that this guy is going to lead a different way, but he believes in himself and he's got moxie. But if you were one of the Cam Ward skeptics, you'd be like, what is this guy talking about? He is a bit of a loose cannon in front of a microphone. Different situation with Carson Beck. He comes in a little bit of a man of mystery in that the only thing that people really know about him is he dated this one person. He's got his arm injury. He's not a super flashy type, and his teammates don't really also know much about him, but the level of maturity that he approached that entire process, the things that he said too, I really read into how he tries to develop camaraderie with his teammates, and he goes about it a different way. Sometimes you want to be a golfing buddy or a roommate to a wide receiver. Sometimes you just want to go out there on the field and work with somebody. And I think it's going to as C-Money's touched on, we all kind of have CJ Daniels as the leading receiver here. I think that age, the experience of going from one school to another that CJ Daniels has, D-Money, I think that this is a pairing that we should keep our eye on. I'm not saying Restrepo, Cam Ward, like, I think Miami's going to have a much more balanced attack this season, even though Cam Ward was pretty balanced with where he sprayed the ball. But I think if we were ever to lock in on one particular dynamic on that offense, that's one to keep an eye on.
Yeah, and it's a style of play as well. I always use a Kobe Young comparison. Beck last year, without Brock Bowers, without Ladd McConkey, he really focused on Colby Young in the early part of the season. They got a Clemson game, getting him one-on-one, throwing him that back shoulder. I just think he likes to throw to contested catch wide receivers. He trusts his placement. He doesn't worry as much about separation if he can place it where he wants, and the receiver has the ability to make those kind of plays away from his body using his strength. So that's CJ Daniels. I think that pairing, just from a football standpoint, makes sense. From an age standpoint, makes a lot of sense, just because, again, these are like he's the old guy in the room. And Daniels, what he's doing is he's working with the young receivers in that room and being sort of the coach on the field, bringing those guys along. We talked about it. That's something Miami didn't really have last year. The veterans were really focused on performing, and you had the performance number one passing offense in the country. I think Daniels obviously focused on his own performance, but taking more of an active role in working with those young kids. I interviewed him for Storm Sessions. Great kid. You could tell he cares about the great young man, really. He cares about the younger players, and his dad's like a motivational speaker, former athlete. So that's sort of part of his DNA, is to invest in others with CJ Daniels. So I think that's not only will he help Carson Beck, he'll help the young receivers in the room. He looks good on his workout videos. I know Pete's been saying he's going to be the leading receiver. There's everybody. It's funny. You hear about CJ Daniels, you hear about JoJo Trader, you hear about Malachi Toney. Everybody's kind of got a different player that's getting hyped. If all three of those guys can meet expectations, forget the rest of the room, which Keelan Marion, other guys there in the mix, I think you're going to be in very good shape at wide receiver. Before I give the mic back, shout out to Eric, shout out to Armani at the airport. Pete, I was walking through the airport yesterday, and you and 50 were on, and my boy Armani was watching you guys while working at the MIA. So, we're worldwide out here. We're at Miami International Airport. Shout out to Eric. Shout out to Armani. Keep things running on time out there. Appreciate everything you do.
Some good things were said about Malachi by Mario Cristobal. I know CanesInSight on our socials. By all means, follow us on social media.
I'll pull that post up right now.
Yeah, and Mario Cristobal. Obviously, there is one headliner on the marquee when it comes to ACC Media Day this week in the coaching ranks, and it's going to come around on Thursday. Mario Cristobal in a different position. I think last year was really big for the doubts. I mean, you had the disaster the prior year with the bad game management. Kind of put a lot of those narratives to bed. Everyone can see a sustainable business model over here, kind of overshadowed by his quarterback. And I think the main takeaway from, look, we talked to mostly Miami people out there. There was a lot of national media out there, regional media, ACC types and whatnot. I think it's pretty irrefutable who the winner of day one of ACC Media Day was, and it was Carson Beck. He didn't have a high bar to clear. I think he made it clear he's going to have a different approach to Cam Ward. The comparisons are going to be inevitable because of who he's following, but if you can read into a man's approach and how he carries himself, that's the type of attitude that you want out of someone that is stepping into those shoes. He's certainly not going to shy away from that. He had pretty big shoes to fill at Georgia. And I think that is commonly looked over when people talk about the Cam Ward to Carson Beck handoff. Is he took over for a legend at Georgia, a legend that finally had climbed the top of the mountaintop over there, a legend that hadn't graduated despite being there for 18 years seemingly. Carson Beck did that with Stetson Bennett. He's coming over here. It's a different situation. Miami is start for a winner, but Miami is going to approach it a lot differently. And I think that Carson Beck has the right mentality going into it. You mentioned the Ruben Bain thing. I'm glad that you did. Let's hit this Malachi note before I go over to the defense, because I was really encouraged by what I heard by some of the defensive reps over there. But Mario Cristobal, he doesn't give you much, right, Pete? We guard state secrets around here, but word has gotten out about Malachi Toney from a brilliant spring that he had. This looks to be a young man that's going to make an impact from day one here. I'm excited to see him in fall camp, to see what kind of growth he's made just from the spring. What did you make of Mario Cristobal's comments on Malachi Toney?
Well, I was cracking up, and I know D, you'll get a kick out of this because it was Joe Rose who asked him the question. And Joe Rose is very plugged in locally, goes to a lot of high school games, and the way that Joe Rose prefaced it, because he knows Mario does not like to hype up these young kids. He said, "I hate to do this, coach, but my guys in Broward, they told me, to ask you about this guy, Malachi Toney." So, and of course, Mario just goes right into it, and he says he's a special talent, a special young man, awesome family, and has really made some impressive plays and has shown maturity that you don't often see from a guy his age, a guy that is going to get there early in the morning and do a ton more work on his route running, and also a guy who recognizes that he has a ton to work on. Shades of how he spoke about Ruben Bain a couple years ago. Mark Fletcher, he has always spoken like this about Elijah Lofton last year. But I think the impact we'll see Toney have will probably be more than what we saw from Lofton last year, just because of the nature of the offense and the need at that position.
I think this is what we've been saying about Toney the whole time, right? Which is it's about the off the field. And you see it here. We saw him on the field. We saw him in spring. He made a lot of plays in spring. In the spring game in particular, which was open to the public, you saw him catch 2 touchdowns. But it's really the off the field stuff. He says it right here. Going in there early, doing work on route running, jugs machine, watching film, learning about defenses. That's really what this guy's about. You saw him post that picture from posted one of those like shirtless pictures to show he's been working in the weight room. This guy's all about football. He's been all about football. He's a quarterback at heart. So he has that sort of quarterback mentality at the wide receiver position. We always say on the show, when it comes to playing early, intelligence is the most important thing. And work ethic. That is what it comes down to when you talk about playing early. It's not about talent. It's not about anything other than, you got to be physically ready enough, but more importantly, it's about the mental readiness. And I think Toney has that. It's an important position in the offense, obviously, between Xavier Restrepo last year, Tank Dell leading the nation and receiving under Shannon Dawson. So there's a key position. But I think with Toney, it's the mental part and the fact that, at the slot, he's big enough for what he's going to be asked to do. He needs to get physically mature, but I think he's strong enough to do what he needs to do there, especially after what he's done in the summer. So, I would say he is the guy, as far as the freshman, who you expect to play the earliest. And the buzz I'm hearing out of UM is not just, hey, this guy can play early. It's more, this guy could be a star for us.
D-Money, you'd be so proud of me because I had a little mini staycation here over the last few days, had some work being done at the house, and I decided to stay at a hotel that was adjacent to Dadeland. So I was just steps away from the dining pavilion. And guess where I had dinner last night, D-Money? Just take a wild guess.
I mean, were you like going for the gold? Were you just trying to get by, or were you going for something that was potentially life-changing?
Restaurant night 1, all right? But night 2, I was like, I got to head over to this dining pavilion, and I got to have dinner with my family. And, it's more of a boutique concept, right? So I'm not going to get the huge Bisayne panisado that takes me 5 days to digest over at Islas. But I did get a bowl, and I got a vaca frita de pollo bowl. And man, did it hit the spot. I got all the extra fixins, D-Money. I'm so proud to have Islas as our partner here on our Wednesday shows.
How did your family enjoy? I mean, very svelte, right? Very fit family members. So, they're not going to be eating garbage. How did they enjoy the whole meal?
Oh, they loved it. Croquetas for days. Had some left over for breakfast this morning.
I love it. 7 different types, as you can see there. The tostones, I mean, that's high quality right there. The sandwiches. I saw somebody in Denver, actually, in the airport in Denver. Maybe he was coming from Miami, but he didn't look like, a local, just the way his hair was. But he was wearing a shirt that had the ingredients for the Cuban sandwich on the shirt. That's all. It was just words describing the ingredients to a Cuban sandwich. I was going to grab him and say, get on this plane, turn around, go to the Dayland Dining Pavilion, Islas Canarias Cuban Express. So I know John Lagoon saying shout out to the kimchi.
I didn't have kimchi this time. I kept it pretty basic, but I wanted to have a bowl. I do a lot of IFing So I needed a big hearty meal.
What's intermittent fasting? Is that what IFing is what we say?
Yeah.
What's
Well,
your
I'm dealing
timeline
with like
on
a
that?
crazy return right now, and I didn't want to draw
I just
out.
sent you a tip in the private chat, Mike.
Right.
Maybe when you're speaking, if you lower the volume on your computer, and then just bring it back up when you're not.
Yeah,
speaking.
we'll bring it back manual.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Pete.
that should work.
All right, that should work. That's working right now.
Wait, so what's the timeline on
there were a lot of elder
IF thing?
statesmen that made this trip on the defensive side. I know Ruben Bain. Usually, he's of that star status. That if you take upperclassmen, but if you're gonna take an underclassman, it's gonna be a guy that most people have pegged as a first-round draft pick in Ruben Bain. High expectations for him. Didn't make the trip. You outlined exactly why. But the players that did make the trip, Keem Mesidor, Wesley Basaint, those are guys that have been around. They've had a couple different coaches. Mesidor, very well traveled. You want to talk about mid-20s? Keem Mesidor has been around the block, and these guys were effusive in their praise of Corey Heatherman. And I also was impressed by how much they bit their tongue, because they had plenty of opportunities to take shots at Lance Guidry. They didn't, but they did underline some of the issues last year. And communication. This was something that was a problem, as we've talked about here, and we're not peeling back the curtain too much. Communication was a problem amongst the coaches when Lance Guidry was here. It trickled down to the players, and you saw plenty of communication breakdowns on the field. So I think it was really encouraging to see Basaint and Mesidor really stress Heatherman and his communicative skills. We've talked about this before. Corey Heatherman, teaching background, communication is the name of the game when you're an educator. So I think that this is super encouraging given what plagued Miami last year. I don't know if you were really all that dialed into what the defensive players were, as everybody's attention was over to Carson Beck, but that stuff was really encouraging, D-Money.
Yeah, no question. I think I want to see what it looks like here in spring, because in August, because in spring you saw the defense going against the backup quarterbacks, and it just wasn't the same look in the good on good. So I'm curious to see how this Heatherman defense looks going against a quarterback like Carson Beck. This should be one of the best, if not the best, offenses in the ACC, battling Clemson, and a very balanced offense. So in terms of how it looks, going toe to toe, I think that'll be a good look. Really, I think the people are going to love this defense most are going to be the defensive line, just because we've talked about it before, the stunting, all the movement, too much. It didn't click with the players we had. Tyler Barron, 5th round pick, should have been a 2nd round pick. Part of that could be, you could say it's on him, but at the same time, I don't think he was used in the proper way. Ruben Bain, you saw the tremendous drop off with his play. I don't think injuries were the only reason for that. Talking to people, just letting those guys play in simple alignments where they're not thinking too much about where they're going to line up, how much they're going to move, just focus on beating the player in front of them, I think is the key. One name you heard a lot in these interviews from all the players, Armando Blunt. And what you hear with Armando Blunt, it's not about technique. It's not about finesse. This guy is extremely aggressive. He's extremely relentless. He runs down plays. He's physical. He's borderline dirty from what I've heard. And I say that in a positive way, because like when a guy's like a maniac like this, but then they're also, the valedictorian of his high school. He ran a 4.8 when he was like a freshman as a big defensive lineman. I don't even know what he runs now, but he's fast. P was reporting he was running with the linebackers the other day. He was a state champion shot putter as a freshman, so he's got that power in his game. All told, there's a 5-star player in Armando Blunt that you keep hearing about his effort levels and physicality and IQ. So when you hear about the intangibles with a 5-star skill set, usually there's good results. So that's one that I caught numerous times in the comments. Shout out to David Lake, did a great notebook from up there. But in many comments, people were talking about Armando Blunt, and that was something I took away from these interviews.
We did a deeper dive on Heatherman's defenses. Now, some of the analytics do have some concerns. Like the rushing stats overall are very good, especially at a program in Minnesota that historically doesn't recruit well. But then we go to things like yards per attempt and game situations. Got a little dicey there, but I think we also acknowledge the fact that he doesn't have the best talent pool over at Minnesota. But in the counting stats in the Big Ten, 9th nationally in points allowed at 16.9 per game. That is top tier conference opposition that he's going against too. 5th in total defense, 285.7 yards allowed per game, 12th in rushing defense. We can kind of parse that a little bit, read into it. Maybe that concern is mitigated. The counting numbers though look like, hey, with an undermanned roster, this guy still found a way to get results. Miami has certainly more talent than any of the Golden Gopher teams that he had in his past or any of his other previous stops. I know he's a Schiano guy, was over at Rutgers, and we have some of that personnel coming in here. But when you pair the talent that was very clearly wasted, and it's also not just on Guidry too. I mean, a defensive line, a lot of those are individual battles. You highlighted a guy, Tyler Barron, and where he went in the draft. Part of the problem was he was too obsessed with where he was going to go in the draft, and he wasn't buying into the team scheme, which was hard to know, really. What do you think is going to be the single biggest thing that Corey Heatherman brings to the table here? Is it that communication? Is it making sure that everyone on the team is bought in and knows exactly what they're doing? Because one thing that really stuck out last year was these guys had no idea how to pass off a receiver to the next guy. That stuck out. That bit Miami pretty much from week 2 on.
Yeah, I would say less attention to alignment and all that movement and more attention to communication and the details of a simpler scheme. So just simplifying things, but not dumbing it down, because you want the communication and the details to be at the highest level, taking less off their minds in other ways to focus on the communication aspect, the alignment aspect, the technique aspect, all of those sort of things. That to me is going to be the biggest change. And look, what can happen in 1 year, who knows? If you look at, for example, D'Onofrio to May, and I'm just going to pull up the stats right now. So let's pick any stat. Let's say scoring defense. How about that? Let's start with something simple like scoring defense. In 2015, which was the last year under Coach D'Onofrio, Miami was 84th in scoring defense. In 2016, which was the first year under Manny, 13th. So 84th to 13th in 1 year. Now, you had very good talent that was inherited under that Golden accumulated. He actually recruited some very good defensive linemen. You think of Joe Jackson, think of who was a freshman that year but was recruited by Golden, RJ McIntosh, Kendrick Norrell, younger guys.
Chad Thomas,
John Garvin as a I guess he came in the next year, but you had younger guys, Trent Harris. Similar this year, right? You're talking about Justin Scott. We mentioned Armando Blunt earlier. Ruben Bain is an older player as a junior in Messidor, but I mean, big time older players. Bain being a first round pick type of talent. Marquise Lightfoot, right? Malik Bryant, guys like that. These are highly rated players. Hayden Lowe. So I see similarities between 15 and 16 in terms of at least what was. And we know how the results turned out. So yes, we want it to be that kind of jump. So I don't want to be too much of like, hey, the best case scenario is what it's going to be. But if you're looking for parallels and just putting myself back in 2016, what Manny said he was going to do was simplify things, focus on details, focus on mentality, and getting a feel particularly, and avoiding some of the miscommunication, the overthinking that was going on with highly talented, highly recruited players. Similar to what you see now. I'm not saying it's going to be the same results, but I mean, we went from 80 something to 13th last year in scoring defense. Well, where were we at? Let's just pull it up here. This is only against FCS opponents. We were 70th in scoring defense, and much higher if you just isolate the ACC. Minnesota was 10th, right? The stat I look at the most on defense, opponent yards per play. So if you look at opponent yards per play, Ohio State, I'm just focusing on Power 4 teams. Ohio State, Texas, Indiana, Ole Miss, which is a super talented team, Tennessee, Penn State, SMU, surprisingly, which I think is the yards per plays down because they allowed so many plays on defense because of their pace that it just kind of went down because of that. Notre Dame, Alabama, Michigan, South Carolina, and then you get to Minnesota with Heatherman. So that's the company you want to be in. I mean, those are the teams that have all the guys getting drafted, all the stars. You think about Michigan with Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant. Alabama's got a bunch of guys going to get drafted this year. Notre Dame, we know how good their defense was. Penn State with Abdul Carter. Tennessee with their pass rushers that went on to the NFL. Ole Miss, Walter Nolan, all those guys. Indiana had a great defense. Bring a lot of those guys back. Texas and Ohio State. So again, the company that Heatherman was in last year was the right kind of company. So let's see how it goes here with Miami. But I think the fact that he's taking over a front seven that has highly recruited talent does remind me of that 15 to 16 transition.
I have a shameful admission. I like Rhett Lashlee. I know he poaches our players and he develops them into something more over there. I mean,
I was gonna say, Mike, are you sure he wasn't the winner of Media Day for Canes fans after what he said?
Yeah, a lot of Canes fans. Well, let's dive into what he said specifically about Miami. And I thought his quotes about the SEC were a little bit more interesting because Rhett Lashlee seems like he is certainly put any doubts to bed. He took SMU to Charlotte their first year in the ACC, made it to the college football playoff. It seemed like Miami had a good one in Rhett Lashlee. But how did Rhett Lashlee further ingratiate himself to the Miami fans over there, Pete?
I am bringing up a tweet from our good friend Trenton Breeze, and the quote was, "Miami should have been in last year with a 10-2 record. No question, they were one of the top 12 teams in the country."
Now, this serves the greater purpose of trying to combat the SEC when it comes to propaganda and narrative. That's going to be impossible. You're tilting at windmills. The people that establish the narrative, largely it's 90% ESPN and then whatever Fox does with their networks. It's an SEC Big Ten nation, right? You're always going to be fighting an uphill battle there, but it's not the only shot that Rhett Lashlee, while that is lifting Miami up, we know that the intentions there are to get more ACC teams into this college football playoff. As we saw with Miami, they were fighting a losing battle when it came to fighting for their cause, because people who are just naturally predisposed to trusting the SEC brands, they went with that. We saw that play out. Bama was going to get in. They ultimately didn't, and then they ended up losing to Michigan. But D-Money, I'm curious your thoughts on what Rhett had to say about the SEC. He was actually using their top line success against them, saying, what are you talking about, this being such a difficult conference? If anything, it's a super top heavy conference. There have been like 6 teams that have won this thing since we had color television, essentially, which was a pretty interesting point. But I will say there have been 2 ACC teams that have pretty much mattered since Miami entered. And while that's not necessarily the 1970s, we're fighting a losing battle here, but got to give Rhett Lashlee some points for trying.
Yeah, no, I got a lot of respect for Rhett Lashlee. No issues there. Dabo Swinney, I never was a big Dabo hater. He was always pumping up Miami when Miami had any kind of momentum. So I got no problem with either of those guys. I will say, if I'm an SEC fan, South Carolina is one of those teams that has not won a championship, and they beat Clemson last year. So, I wouldn't be too pleased if I was an SEC fan. I think they have probably good arguments to respond to that. What's going to be interesting with Rhett Lashlee is Arkansas. Pittman's on kind of thin ice over there. So let's say Pittman has another bad year and he's gone. Does Rhett Lashlee leave SMU for Arkansas, which would be one of those like non-top 6 type of jobs? I know they won a national championship back before that time period he's talking about, back when like Jerry Jones and Jimmy Johnson, but they haven't done anything really to that level since. So he's from Arkansas. Rhett Lashlee, he's from Northwest Arkansas. So does that mean that if Pittman gets fired, Rhett Lashlee says, Arkansas, hey, no, thank you. I've got a good gig here in the ACC. I'm not trying to be a mediocre SEC team. Or does he say, it's my dream job, I'm taking it? So that was one of the first things that kind of came to my mind, because if Arkansas's coach gets fired and he just has a decent season at SMU, he's going to be the number 1 candidate for that job. So these comments would definitely,
and I'm sure he'll be compensated very nicely for that opportunity.
Right.
And I know that Arkansas tugs at the heartstrings there, but Texas Tech has a 4th-year head coach. They have spent a lot of money. That is increasingly becoming a better job. Also, let's not poo-poo SMU. They just showed they play in a conference that they just made it to the ACC championship game in their first year. They've got a lot of wealth a lot of big time influential alumni. That is not a bad job that Rhett Lashlee presently sits on. He's presently making it a better job. I'm not saying that it's a better job than Arkansas.
No, I think it's a great job, and I think obviously it's like an NBA, like the Eastern Conference, the Western Conference. It's you want to be in the East right now, but just going off what TJ said, if you see what Arkansas just did to go get John Calipari, they've got some money of their own.
Oh, no, no doubt. And I'm sure that there's a coaching carousel. Who knows what happens with Lane? Lane, I don't think is long for this college football world. He just seems kind of stuck. It's why he was so interested in Miami, even though that interest wasn't necessarily mutual there. But Rhett Lashlee, deservedly so, D-Money, a name that should be atop most of those candidate lists. Hopefully he doesn't have the same level of success that he has last year, because that would once again have Miami on the outside looking in all likelihood. At least this year, though, Miami's a pretty big game in Dallas, one of their 4 big road games.
Yeah, and SMU lost a lot of talent, right? You think of the Miami guys; those guys are all pretty much gone. You lose Brashard Smith, who was very impactful for them, although Chris Johnson, I think, is going to fill that role. Elijah Roberts, probably their biggest loss on the defensive line. Their defense was good last year. We just went through those numbers, even with the kind of the funky numbers based on their pace. But Jafari Harvey, they lose. They lose some guys. So Jared Harrison Hunt, just think of the Miami guys on their front. So we'll see what they do. They're going to have a bigger target on their back, obviously, but they've been a pretty consistent program for the last couple of years, even before they got to the ACC. So we'll see. That's a big game. We'll be out there in Dallas, Katy Trail. So that'll be a fun road game to play. I would have loved that matchup last year, just because giving Cam Ward all those extra possessions would have been tough for SMU. It's just a bad style matchup, even with our bad defense. This year could be potentially the same thing. If that's, if you talk about our defense getting a little better and our offense remaining at least a top 10 unit in the country, doesn't have to be number 1 by a mile like last year. That's the type of matchup you don't like if you're SMU, because if you have these 5-star defensive linemen, they can overwhelm your under-talented offensive line for a holding penalty, a sack, something that kills your drive, and then their offense is getting all these chances to score when they're good. That can cause a lot of problems.
So my gold medal winner from Miami's ACC Media Day was Carson Beck. There were certain things that he had to do just from an approach that I think he nailed, and he passed the test with flying colors. Silver medal, how the defensive players that went up there were talking about this defense, because that defense essentially kept Miami out of a playoff. And hell, with that offense, that defense might have stood in the way of Miami having some real success in the CFP. When you think back, if you had a defense that was, say, close to 2017, with that coupled with that quarterback and that offense, Miami could have really made noise. So last year feels like a real missed opportunity. But here's my bronze medalist. Miami's not the circus. Miami doesn't have the same kind of buzz it has, and I say this in a good way. It felt like Miami belonged. It felt like Miami finally belonged in the upper echelon of teams that are there just to take care of business at ACC Media Day, go back on the field and continue on the path to Charlotte. And that is saying a lot for a team that's been to Charlotte once, for a program that has not covered itself in glory, for a program that anytime that there is a level of buzz around it, always seems to fall on its face. Right now, the expectation is, if you look at the odds, second most likely in the conference to win the ACC championship behind Clemson. They actually played SMU, who's in the mix there in terms of the favorites, so they'll control their own destiny to a degree. It is expected of this Miami team to make it to Charlotte. It wasn't even necessarily expected last year. Maybe I'm moving the goalpost a little bit. That was the hope and expectation of Miami fans. I'm not sure that was the national POV, because there were still some unknowns about Mario and whether or not the offense would work with Cam Ward. You've got enough proof of concept now. You got Mario in year 4, and I was kind of taken aback by how normal Miami's offseason has been, quite frankly, how the circus is somehow revolving around Bill Belichick and not the Miami Hurricanes. That was a nice, refreshing change of pace, D-Money.
Yeah, I think to be really a normal program, they got to get the playoff. I think, and I don't want to just jump to what we always end up saying, but he was hearing you talk, I'm thinking, man, once you make the playoff, now not only you're a normal non-circus type situation, but you are like, hey, we're one of those teams. We're going to come in here with some highly rated players wearing suits. We're going to talk about very high expectations. You're going to ask about high expectations. You're going to treat us maybe a little differently than you treat the Virginias, the Virginia Techs, all these other schools that are here. I think we're close to that. Certainly, like you said, the circus has died down. The expectations are higher. But I really hope next media day Miami comes in at just a clear different level where they're being treated not just as, a real team and not a joke, but hey, this is a real national type of program that they're going to come up and show up to the event. They'll bring their highly rated players. They'll answer some questions, but their focus is bigger than the ACC and all that kind of stuff. So Clemson's been that for a while, where it just feels different when they talk to Clemson about who they're talking to, what they're asking about, what the expectations are. I think Miami's getting close to that, but that's, to me, that was my takeaway, just hearing you say, how we're becoming more of just a real program. That's when we're officially stamped as a real program, when either we win the ACC or make the playoff. And now we can carry ourselves that way. But a good start yesterday being with the professionalism, with just the talent that was there. I mean, you talk about, Carson Beck, Malino, these are first round type picks. So you want to send first round picks to Charlotte. That's a good step. And I think you saw that last year, obviously.
Pete, I understand what he's doing with the playoff. There's a way to get to the playoff without necessarily getting to Charlotte. But for me, this team absolutely has to get to Charlotte. The schedule's all out there for them. They're tough games. Yes, no doubt. A lot of them out of conference. They avoid Clemson on the field this year. They get to play SMU and at least have a say as to whether or not they actually go to Charlotte. We know last year was wonky inside the ACC. There were all sorts of late November scenarios in which 4 out of the 5 teams hadn't even played each other yet, with Charlotte on the line. The easiest path to that CFP is getting to Charlotte. You don't even necessarily have to win the game, but you have to show up to the damn game, Pete. And that's where my level of expectation is. I'm not going to move it back to playoff just because of what I highlighted right there. This team needs to get to Charlotte. I need to stop canceling hotel reservations in late November.
Well, especially because the 2 games that everyone's scheduling, circling on the schedule, you could lose both of those and it still won't matter to your. Obviously, you don't want that to be the case, and then then you have to win the ACC. Then you actually have to win it all. But that's what makes this so must do this year, because it might sound cliche, but it really comes down to winning those games that you haven't been able to win for years. Running the table on the Louisvilles of the world, and Florida State is not going to be as bad as last year, right? You're on the road again. So that's not going to be, I don't think it's going to be a walkover win. On the road at Virginia Tech, Syracuse again. So again, I'm not, everyone talking about you should run through the ACC. I haven't seen it happen yet. So I don't know.
Well, there's a lot of narrative at play here, and the ACC, to a degree, let's just take Miami out of the equation, because Miami has a marquee matchup against Notre Dame, and if they lose that game in Notre Dame was a national finalist. They were runner-up. They had an amazing playoff run. They're supposed to keep building on that. Depending on how that game goes and how Miami looks in that game, we can even take a loss there and know that everything is out in front of us, and not necessarily have to worry about an ACC narrative. And we'll do that convenient thing where Notre Dame's success doesn't really count as the ACC success, even though they're basically an ACC team anyways, which is always strange. But let's talk about week 1 in the ACC schedule, because as a part of this media day rollout, the ACC was really touting strongest non-conference schedule in the nation. Well, let's look at week 1. Because if you want to be able to grab the narrative away from ESPN steering the nation to lazy SEC takes and Big Noon Saturday, pushing people over to the Big Ten because they're financially incentivized to, let's look at week 1, shall we? In the ACC, I'm going to get the popcorn out for this matchup. Friday, Georgia Tech at Boulder, Colorado. Coach Prime. The Colorado Buffaloes versus Georgia Tech, a thorn in Miami's side. We know how Georgia Tech rises to the occasion when they're an underdog. The line right now has Georgia Tech as a road favorite, a rebuilding year for Coach Prime, but week one, all the excitement there. That is a great marquee matchup. Everybody's going to be college football hungry. ACC has a great job of running out of the gates really strong. Then let's get into this terrifying Saturday that the ACC has lined up for itself. And D, I want your opinion here shortly. You have Syracuse at Tennessee, Fugal at Tennessee. Tennessee had a very interesting offseason. Tennessee, a big-time favorite, almost 2 touchdowns against Syracuse. You have Alabama at Florida State. We're going to be bringing the popcorn back out for that one, hoping that Alabama absolutely embarrasses Florida State, breaks their bodies. And then you got LSU Clemson, which is a really interesting game. Night game on ABC. And you have a couple other spots where on Sunday, Virginia Tech at South Carolina, Cal in a very tricky spot. They could absolutely fall on their face late night, Saturday night at Oregon State. But a real opportunity here to send a message to the nation, and it's all in the ACC's court right now, D-Money.
Yeah, a lot of those matchups are not the matchups I would pick, right? As far as like it for ACC victories, aside from the Georgia Tech one, they're not our strongest ACC teams, and they're going against better teams, quite frankly. The Tennessee-Syracuse one's interesting. Syracuse just lost too much. They lost their quarterback, obviously. They lost receivers. They lost their running back, LaQuint Allen. They lost offensive linemen. They lost their best pass rusher. They lost 2 other better players to the portal. Went to Texas as a defensive tackle. Went to USC, I believe, as a center. So Syracuse just lost too much. Tennessee, I think, made a big mistake because the quarterback for Syracuse, Steve Angeli, Notre Dame transferred the backup. I think he should be the quarterback for Tennessee. So I think Syracuse actually has the quarterback edge there. Tennessee probably the overall talent edge. We'll see how that one plays out. I think Tennessee, if you're asking me which team I think is going to have a major step back, I think Tennessee, even though Nico really wasn't that good last year at all, and I still think he's very much overrated. The quarterback they got was a nothing last year. So I don't know why Tennessee is getting hype. They lost a lot to the draft. They lost a running back who was basically their whole offense, and Dylan Sampson. They got a lot to work on. So maybe Tennessee is vulnerable, but I just don't think Syracuse has enough. I think the ACC is going to make their statement with Miami, Notre Dame, right? Clemson, LSU. Those are really the opportunities for Miami or for the ACC to show what they can do. And quite frankly, those are the 2 teams, right, that are going to make an impression for the ACC most likely. We don't know how things turn out. Maybe someone emerges like SMU last year, but those are your best bullets, and you're going against real teams that if you win, if Clemson and Miami both win opening weekend, ACC narrative, at least at the top, is set for the rest of the year pretty much. So